Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the February meeting of Scottsdale Parent Council. We're going to begin by saying the pledge, and the flag is over here on this back wall. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next is our land acknowledgement. As we gather for this meeting, let us take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so, recognize the various traditional lands on which we do our business today. We wish to acknowledge this land on which this SPC meeting is taking place. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Hohokam, the Akimel O'odham, and most recently, the Salt River Pima Indian community. Today, this meeting taking place is still the home to many indigenous people from across Maricopa, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. Okay, today's agenda, we're gonna start the meeting asking Dr. Menzel questions like we normally do. If you have questions, there are index cards over on the table. You can write them, come stick them in this basket. And then we're gonna hear about the statewide assessments that all K-12 school districts have to take, and we're going to hear from Leah Mitchell and Dr. Cindy Bachna about those. We'll end the meeting with some representative updates and then executive board updates, which has a new section that includes updates on bills going through the legislature that impact K through 12 and specifically SUSD. So a little bit more exciting than our normal executive board updates. Okay, so if you have a question, please do the index card thing and bring it to me in the basket. Okay. I'm going to stand over here so I'm on the other side of the wall. All right. SUSD is losing an average of 2% of students each year. What are your plans to deal with that?
So we have been working on that for some time, and it's not a new trend. It's been nearly 30 years of declining enrollment, and we continue to work to attract students from within our boundaries that have not chosen SUSD. We get about 52% of our school-age population. Others are choice, charters, homeschool. There are a number of different options. We are a net winner in the school of choice environment when it comes to neighboring school districts, so we get more of theirs than they get of ours. So Fountain Hills, Paradise Valley, Cave Creek, we're the net winner in that school of choice exchange. There is a birth rate issue, an affordability of housing issue for school-age families. So we're constrained in terms of the universe of potential school-age students, but we're continuing to tell our story. We're doing that through communication and marketing strategies. We're doing it through tours of our campuses. We're encouraging our families to help tell the story because the ones that have chosen us are probably the best representation of why other families should choose SUSD.
Okay, a few days ago, the U.S. Department of Education released a Dear Colleague letter that says if schools and universities do not end DEI-related programming, et cetera, they will lose federal funds. How will this impact SUSD?
So we've had some information from legal review outside of the district that was sent earlier today that made it clear a couple of things. One, in that letter, the Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, indicated that the Dear Colleague letter does not have the force of law. It was an acknowledgement of that. The legal analysis that we saw pointed out where there were lack of specificity and in some areas where there was inconsistency with respect to established law, court precedents, and all the rest. What I'll say very clearly is that the school district has a policy. It's policy AC, non-discrimination, equal opportunity, and it says the following. The district and governing board are committed to creating an environment where celebrating cultural diversity stimulates the awareness of others by recognizing our similarities, acknowledging our differences, and developing global respect for the values of others. The district and governing board are committed to a policy of non-discrimination that does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, including sexual orientation and transgender identity, disability, age, height, weight, marital or family status, religion, military status, ancestry, genetic information, or any other legally protected category, collectively, quote, protected classes, unquote, in its programs and activities, including employment opportunities. So if you read the letter, the Dear Colleague letter, it's very clear that they're doubling down on the anti-discrimination. That is against the law to discriminate against any person based on those categories. Our policy is very clear, unequivocal. We don't discriminate. So I think we're in compliance with the intent of the Dear Colleague letter.
Okay. Can you update us on the governing board discussions about next year's budget?
So you can always watch the meetings to hear some of the discussion about the budget, but Shannon Crozer presented information about the projected impact of declining enrollment using historical data so that we're budgeting realistically with respect to what we can expect to have. Also projecting not more than the 2% inflationary, in quote, inflationary increase from the state, because inflation is more than 2%, but that's what the statute requires the state to give if inflation is over 2%. That is actually not going to be a net 2% because there's $75 million from Prop 123 that's unaccounted for in the roll forward of the money. So there's about 1.3 million that's being held in the balance that could further reduce our budget. So Shannon walked through those things, and we're looking at, with those revenue assumptions, somewhere between a $2.8 and a $4.2 million shortfall. And the team across the district has been looking at opportunities and ways to address that. And we are essentially there from a optimizing the staffing ratios at the student-teacher level, at the building administrator level, and where we're now talking is how do we get to the place where we can address the health insurance costs, which is a challenge for our employees, and any potential pay raises. Shannon outlined a way that we could be able to cover that, not to the tune that we think our employees deserve, but something that would be possible, but also responsible from a stewardship perspective of taxpayer resources. And so that is going forward through the interest-based negotiation process. That'll be brought forward then to the governing board, in part related to teacher contracts at the March 4th board meeting.
This is a follow-up question because I did watch the board meeting, but there was a segment about, in the budget discussion about, it mentioned gifted students and it was a bigger negative hit to the budget. Why is that? Is it because it's an unfunded mandate?
Leah, I think I think the gifted is a right sizing of staff based on the ratios. Yeah.
Okay. All right, which bills and resolutions going through the Arizona legislature will most impact SUSD?
Oh, I don't have those all committed to memory, so I'll talk about one that's a positive that Senator Kavanaugh introduced. We tried to get it passed last year, and he didn't get support. It appears it got out of committee, and we think it might have legs, and that's, I think it's Senate Bill 1007.
It's on our slides,
yeah.
the capital.
Yeah, the capital one. And so that was an outgrowth of conversations we had more than a year ago when the legislation permitted use of tax credit for things like shade structures and capital investment for the robotics lab at Arcadia. Those were some of the examples that we used, and it had been sunsetted language, and we want that removed. I think the compromise is that it'll be sunsetted again somewhere between 5 and 10 years forward, but that would be a positive for us. There are a number of other things that would circumscribe the authority of local school boards to be able to conduct and maintain local control. I think we should watch out for those. It's interesting that people will want local control until they think that the state legislature's judgment should be superimposed on the local communities. And they also feel that way, when the U.S. Department of Education tries to intervene. Everybody wants to have it both ways sometimes, and I think what we should do is really honor the commitment of local communities to be able to elect the people who represent them and then be able to enact policy accordingly.
Okay, those are, we have one more question.
How was the chili cook-off?
It was excellent.
And who won?
Jeff Klimowitz.
And what kind of chili was it?
He had Grandma B's secret recipe. It has a multitude of things in it, like peas. Wouldn't think so.
Ooh.
Grandma B, I think, was trying to stretch her recipe one night and put peas in there, and it worked.
And you thought it was good?
I did not try it. I'm
Well-
not a chili eater. But people voted and they said it was delicious.
All right, good.
And he got second place a couple years ago, so he's working up the ranks.
Moving up. All right.
Yes. Around the bills, something that I'm new to is the RTS system.
Yes.
Is that something that we can, as a community, use as a tool to
I
help?
think every citizen
our-
who's an eligible voter should use the RTS system.
Okay.
I think in a country where we have freedoms to be able to make our voices heard, we should do that. And the Register to Speak system, once you've registered, you can do that remotely from your computer anywhere. And I think it's important for elected officials to hear from their constituents.
Okay. I'm new to it, so I'm trying to track all these bills.
So,
RTS is so important. I mean, if you can go through the RTS report and it'll show 200 people against the bill, 2 people for the bill. I mean, the legislators really do look at that stuff when they take their position into account.
so we're going to share in an email the bills and stuff that we send. So we'll link to the actual text and stuff that are on our slides later. And we can also share, here's how you do RTS, because there are like flyers on how you register and go about it. And it lets you give a literal thumbs up and thumbs down for bills so you can weigh in that way. But yeah, we'll share that information. Yeah.
No, and thank you for engaging, because it's really
Yeah.
important.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Dr.
Well,
Rumble.
thank you, and thanks to Leah and Dr. Bachna. They know their stuff with respect to our assessments, and I think you're going to really enjoy their presentation.
Hi, good evening. I'm going to stand up just for a couple of minutes. I'm here with Dr. Bachna. My name's Leah Mitchell. I think I've met a couple of you before as I've been here in the past, but I'm relatively new to Scottsdale. I've been here since July. I get to serve as the Assistant Superintendent over Educational Services, so all teaching and learning, students, special education, gifted education, fine arts, all sorts of things that make up what our kids are up to each and every day and what our students and teachers are up to. I came here from Tampa, Florida, and so I do love the heat. That's the one consistent thing. And important to know, I have been a teacher. I was a 4th, 5th, and 6th grade teacher, but I'm a 5th grade teacher. You know, once you're a teacher, you kind of settle into like where I'm a 5th grade girl. And I've been an assistant principal, district director, and now I have the opportunity to do this. But my biggest job is shepherding my own child through a public K-12 system, and I'm very fortunate that he's ending his K-12 here in Scottsdale at Chaparral High School. So all the assessments, all the information, I'm hopeful we're able to provide a good amount of education and information for you. And what we don't know, we'll find out, and also open to feedback and thoughts. Lots of what we're going to share today are not Dr. Bachna, Leah Mitchell, Scottsdale Unified School District decisions around which assessments, what assessments from the state level. Obviously, we are governed and held accountable for some of those, but we are going to talk through what those look like and also how we don't just use one-time assessments that happen in the spring to support students all year round. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, but I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bachna to share a bit more, and then we'll be open for questions.
Thank you, Leah. Hi, so I'm Cindy. I'm the Director of Assessment Accountability here. I've been your Director of Assessment Accountability in Scottsdale. This is my 7th year. And prior to that, I was doing the same position in Mesa for approximately 8 or 9 years. So I've been in the field of assessments and accountability in Arizona for close to 20 years now, actually. I was working over there in different capacities in Mesa before I became their Director of Testing. So I keep track of all the assessments and work that goes on around that and keep track of the stuff with the state. As far as my own background, I grew up in the Valley, and then I went to California for my undergraduate, taught special education, and then went to Penn State for a graduate degree in educational psychology, and then decided to come back here where my family is. So it's been great to be back and living in the Valley after being in the cold for a little while. Okay, so thank you for this. Oh, you have a clicker? You're so good.
I was doing that. I'm like, I do not know. I'm not touching it. It keeps moving, but thank you for your help back there.
So I'll make it easier on you guys and stand up here because you're looking at the screen. So assessment overview. Basically, we have two types. The big categories of assessment are formative assessment and summative assessment. Formative assessment are all your things like local, identifying gaps in student learning. So these are the low stakes kind of assessments that go on throughout the school year in the classrooms. So locally benchmark tests, the classroom kind of, teachers do their own thing on their classrooms that's very individualized to their classroom. The homework assignments, group work in-class discussions, sometimes surveys and self-assessments. So these are the things that go on a day-to-day basis that are happening with all of our students across the school district. The big ones are the higher stakes assessments that happen at certain points of the year. Those are the summative assessments. That's where we're looking at our standardized tests. So those are the tests we have to take for the state. I will get into those in a few minutes. But SUSD also has final projects, final essays for classes, final presentations that go on, final reports and final grades. A lot of your students take end of quarter and end of semester assessments depending on the grade level in the different subject areas. So those are more to see if the students have learned what has been presented and they've been through class and gone through over time. Just to give you a district overview of general education, I'm going to focus on the general education piece. There are more nuances to this. I didn't include the gifted testing that we have, that we do blanket testing of all of our second graders across the district to see if they qualify for gifted services. We also have some tests that go on with our English language learner students. Those are required by the state. Those are particular those students. But for all of our general education students, there's some kind of district required assessment in every grade level. In kindergarten to 5th grade, we use what are called FastBridge benchmarks, which are measures of reading fluency. And so your students that are in those grade levels will take those. We knew this year we have what's called the IXL diagnostics, and we're going to have a little bit more information about that later in the presentation. We're looking at math, really focused on the math. And then School City benchmarks. School City is a platform in which our teachers can load their own assessments and administer their own assessments. It has all the capabilities for students to take assessments online, or they could take them on paper and enter the answers online. And it compiles all the information for our teachers and lets them see how the students did. It also lets the students see how they did on the items. So in some of those tests, they can actually dig down into the test items and say, hey, this is what you got right, this is what you got wrong, and you can discuss it with your students. In 6th to 8th grade, our middle schoolers, they're taking a mimic of the AASA, which is our state assessment for those grade levels for English. So they take that 2 or 3 times a year. That gets them practice towards the state assessment. In math, they're also doing IXL diagnostics this year. Again, these are the first time we've had those. They're they're adaptive testing for our students. So as they get through those tests, the test gets easier or harder depending on how they're performing and adjust to the level that the students need. And then they also have end of quarter tests in math in the middle schools. And finally, in our 9th and 11th graders, the state assessments for the 9th and 11th graders are the ACT Aspire, which is kind of like a pre-ACT that they take in 9th grade. And then the actual ACT is our state assessment for 11th grade, which is great. For a long time, our state assessment in Arizona was a homegrown test, which is good, but it's much better to have a national test that they can actually use and potentially use it to get into a college. So for the last 4 or 5 years, we've had the ACT as our state assessment. The other thing that's great about the 11th grade having that national assessment is we can compare ourselves to the nation. We're not just able to compare ourselves locally. So when they take those assessments, they're taking them in English, math, reading, and science. So these are the local, we have practice tests that we give to our high schoolers for these assessments. These are the local practice tests we give every year so that the kids can get practice with that content before they get to the actual ACT. Questions so far? I know I'm just kind of rattling off a lot of information.
Add one little thing. When we think about K-5, you'll see FastBridge benchmarks for ELA, IXL, and School City. I just want to pull forward, and you may be talking about this later, but FastBridge benchmarks are a requirement from the state for our Move On with Reading plans. And so we in the state of Arizona are very, very focused on ensuring the science of reading is our primary mode of instruction for all young students. There are dollars tied to that, and each school is required to submit a plan around how they are going to provide a literacy instruction, intervene for students who may be struggling, and provide additional levels of support. In order for us to be approved by Move On with Reading and meet all of their expectations and guidelines, we have to use assessments that are approved by them and curriculum that is approved by them. And so FastBridge is one of those approved assessments. And so when you see that one being different maybe than an IXL or some things like that, that's something I hear especially from our teachers. They're like, oh, we'd love to do IXL for reading and for math instead of FastBridge and IXL. And we are also working with the Arizona Department of Education and IXL to say, we do also think it's a slick platform. It takes less time. Teachers are finding great value. Students are enjoying it. And so we are working hard to see if that diagnostic will meet that threshold in the future. But just if you're hearing that Move On with Reading is in Arizona, it is a requirement. And we do have to provide those diagnostic assessments as a part of our plan.
Thank you, Leah. That's a really good point. And our principals and campuses have to report the information from those FastBridge assessments to the state 3 times a year. So they go into a portal for the state website and basically talk about how their students are doing, reflect on their practices, consider what they could do better going forward to really adjust and monitor the instruction and literacy with those early grade levels. So it's a pretty big focus at the state as well. District assessment overview. So how do we use the data? So there's 3 ways this is kind of going within the school district. We identify students for acceleration with our assessments. We identify for differentiated instruction, meaning if certain students need other skills or different skills than the whole class. Individualized intervention, if a student's struggling with a particular skill or concept, we use that information to kind of develop those plans to help them. And for summer school placement, we look at our assessment results for summer school placement and ask kids to come in for summer school based on some of those assessment scores. We also use, for summer school, we look at their grade. They have the opportunity to take classes for grades and grade improvement in the summer school plan as well. Our teachers are able to monitor and adjust instruction based on our assessment results and review and calibrate their lesson plans. So again, we want them not to be just giving the tests, because we want them to be using the data and taking in, looking at the information that comes from those tests so that they're better adjusting their instruction in the classroom. We also like that they also like to collaborate with their peers. They can talk to their peers about how things were going well on their assessments and what's a struggle in their classroom is successful in the classroom down the hall. They can talk to them and say, hey, what are your strategies? How are you instructing this that your students are doing better on this particular standard than my students are? And finally, at the administrative level here, we reflect on current successes and potential areas for improvement. In every administrator meeting, we talk about assessments, we talk about results, we have space to have those discussions. We review campus practices surrounding instruction as well. We encourage our leaders to share what's going on their campuses with each other, much like we ask their teachers to share what's going on their campuses. We evaluate our curriculum and curriculum maps based on our results too, and look if things need to be monitored and adjusted. And then again, also collaboration. There's constant discussion of these, trying to take ownership of all this learning that's happening with our students, and not making it a blame game, talking about where things are at and how we can, because there's always room for improvement. There's always ways we could do things better. Yeah. Oh yeah, here, let me give you. Yeah.
So if you could flip back to that other slide. Yeah. So boiling it down in its simplest terms, and this may be oversimplifying it, but there's kind of 2 pieces. There's curriculum, and then there's, I'll say, the delivery of the curriculum to the classroom and stuff. And so I know you see evaluate curriculum and curriculum maps, and I've participated in some of the curriculum selections over the last 3 or 4 years here at the district. But do you ever, I don't see where you go outside to benchmark a curriculum to some other school or district or something, because to see how they're doing versus how we're doing, and should we have a different curriculum? Are we delivering a good curriculum but not delivering it well? How do we assess and evaluate that? Because when you look at the numbers, okay, and we're not very good, quite frankly, okay? And I've spent a lot of time looking at the numbers. And when you look at the percentage off of the Department of Ed, because that's where they're all compiled, students that are proficient, they're not impressive. And I know we can say, well, we're better than the rest of the state. Well, that to me is like saying, well, we don't suck as bad as everybody else does, quite frankly. Because when the numbers are hovering around 50%-ish, plus or minus a few, proficient, that's not real great. When you have over what is it? 8,000 students are not proficient in ELA and over 9,000 in math. That's not proficient. So we ought to be doing something different. And so are we doing that? Do we look at benchmarking? Do we compare? I know we compare just the bottom line numbers, but what are they doing that we're not?
Sure, I'm happy to talk a little bit to that. It's not always super easy to find everybody's released local data and assessment, so we are relying on some of those same proficiency markers. We participate as a school district in multiple state-level organizations, North Valley, East Valley, where we are with like peers, and we, of course, are always looking at each other's numbers and saying things like, what are you using? Are you finding that effective? What are you guys moving forward towards adoption? And so there are those collaborative anecdotal conversations where we would see, ooh, this curriculum that we might hear about is really ringing bells in multiple places that we're envious of. Let's dig deeper into it. Having been in, I've had the opportunity to serve and lead in 4 different states, in 5 different school districts. And so I am relying on a tool called the Center for Education Market Dynamics. And what they do is they will assess across the nation the uses of curriculum and resource packages in districts that with their publicly released information. And so on Scottsdale, you can find our scores, our textbooks, all of that kind of stuff. It allows you then to drill down and find districts like yourself all across the nation. What are they using? How are they using it? What are the different outcomes they are getting? And so what I can tell you is absolutely we do that. I can also sadly inform you there is not a silver bullet. And so what I have found in for 8 years overseeing curriculum adoptions in a school district for 80,000 kids, and they're generally vendors are all very similar. The differences are discriminate and not huge and widespread. But as you hear throughout the nation of different curriculum packages, different approaches, taking on energy and enthusiasm, it's one of those things where we do dig deeper into the numbers. And, you know, the only way to get better is to reflect on what you're doing and make different decisions and improve. But I would say there isn't information that makes it so clear this is what everybody should be using to get to 100% proficiency. It's also often a lot of what are you doing with it? How are you, what's the scope and sequence? How are you outlining the units? I think there's a lot that goes into play, but it is absolutely something we are doing a lot about. I find it interesting because there are things in each system I've worked in. I've come to an organization that may love one product and then go to a different organization that is like, that is the worst product I've ever seen in my life. And so I've truly had that experience with science textbooks. From Colorado as a principal, something my teachers would have never, if I would have asked them to not use FOSS kits, I would have had to like pry them out of their cold dead hands. Because it's so exciting for kids, so hands-on, great science lessons. They valued it so much as a teacher. When I was in Pasco County, Florida, and I talked about FOSS kits, you would have thought I just launched a lead balloon in a room of people who want to run me out. They're like, oh my God, we did that, it's horrible. And so it's interesting to have similar goals, all with children in very different locations, have totally different values from the educators and not dissimilar outcomes in the student achievement. And so it is something that we are really dedicated to looking at. And always, if you hear and know of curriculum packages, resources that you are, gaining highest levels of proficiency in the nation with certain groups, please let us know, because we do, like you mentioned, we are adopting curriculum, we are reviewing. We are also obligated to review who responds to our calls and our vendor calls. And so it is one of those things that even if I wanted every single person to come to the table and say, we want to sell to you, yes, Scottsdale, we want to be considered. So not every vendor and publisher always responds, which then precludes some additional layers of investigation because of the policies and practices around purchasing and RFPs and selections. And so I hope that provides a little bit of answer. It's not short, but there is a tool recently released, I think, beta version was 3 years ago. I've seen it grow over time, and that's the CEMD, Center for Education Market Dynamics, and it really does triangulate or quadrant. It takes so many different data points, I don't know the word for it, to show different systems' use of different resource packages and the outcomes they're getting with it.
State assessment overview. Okay, so this kind of is a chart of where we were and where we are now. Our tests have more or less been the same, at least at the 3 through 8 level, for a number of years. They've changed names several times. A few years ago, it was called the AZ Merit, which was the Arizona Measurement of Educational Readiness to Inform Teaching. And then it transferred over to being called the AZM2 after the pandemic, and right now it's called the AASA. It's the Arizona Academic Standards Assessment. We give it to every 3rd through 8th grader in English language arts, that's ELA, and math. The English test is comprised of 2 reading sections and 1 writing section. The students will take the 2 reading sections usually on 2 separate class days, and they'll take the writing section on another class day, just not to fatigue them so much. They have as much time as they need to take these assessments. They're not timed. In math, it's a 2-part exam as well. In the middle schools, they sometimes have sections on the test where they can use calculators, and so our students might be using a calculator, either a handheld one or one built into the system. These tests are 100% administered online. A few of our students that have accommodations for paper, but to be honest, at this point in time, the majority of students in the state are taking these tests online. They will take them, it usually is about 3 or 4 days of April when they're taking them in 3rd through 8th grades. All of our schools have a test. We all have the same testing window, but our schools get to choose when they want to do it. So each campus will put out a schedule and let their parents know when the students are going to be testing, and it'll be different classrooms on different days. Some schools choose to combine it into a very short period to get it done with, and some schools choose to kind of take a little bit more time within this testing window. We are mandated by law to test 95% of our students. So basically every kid has to be tested on these assessments. They monitor that, and they penalize us if we do not assess all students. So it has to be equitable that every student is taking these assessments. So you can't choose which students to test. That's why it's such an important thing that you'll probably hear from your school principals. Hey, please make sure your students are here on testing days. If they're not here, they have to make the testing up. In high school, like I said earlier, 9th grade is taking what's called the ACT Aspire. It's a ACT, kind of a pre-ACT test. Came from the ACT company. It's actually obsolete. They've since gotten rid of that test at the national level, but Arizona's purchased that contract, and so they're going to stick with it for probably 1 more year. Usually these contracts are 5 years. And that's a test of English, math, reading, and science. And those are 4 different sections. Those are timed tests, and the high schoolers take them all in a single morning. So on ACT Aspire Day, all the 9th graders will take that. On the ACT, that's also the same thing. That's the full test. On 11th grade, it's a single day. In Scottsdale, we run a day where the 11th graders are the only students on campus. They take that test. It's timed. They have 4 sections they have to get through, and it's just everybody's focused on that one testing day. We found that to be very useful because the students take it very seriously. They know this is important. Everybody has to be at school for that test on that day. And around the state, we all have very limited, because the test is a national test, it's much more limited, and you have to be timed, and you have to only take it on certain days. So pretty much every student in the state is taking it within a few weeks, at the end of March and the beginning of April. And finally, we have science assessments in the state, mandated in grades 5, 8, and 11. Those are grade band tests of science. So basically at the end of 5th grade, your students are taking the test that's covering content from 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. At the end of 8th grade, they're taking a test that's covering the science content from 6th, 7th, and 8th. And then at the end of 11th grade, they're taking a test that's covering 9th, 10th, and 11th grade science. So your students, if you look at our chart here, our students are in science in 11th grade are taking 2 different tests of science. They're taking the ACT, which is national standards, and then they're taking a local science test for the Arizona state standards. Yes?
Yeah, just to clarify, so 10th graders and seniors don't take tests?
Not from a state required perspective.
Okay.
Your 10th graders right now are off the hook. It's changed over the years, but right now, yes.
Okay.
In Scottsdale, we test all of our 10th graders on the PSAT as a district test, so they get that practice on the PSAT. We give it in sophomore year because the junior year is where they can choose to take it for qualifying for national merit scholarships. And we found that giving it sophomore year to all of our students gives them that practice before they take it in the junior year to potentially qualify for those scholarships. In the senior class, Local assessments are going on, and then the AP exams, that's a big thing with our population. And then at Desert Mountain, if you have a student at Desert Mountain, there's IB, and those are the International Baccalaureate tests.
But there's no, I guess,
State assess-
gauge at the senior level of where they graduate. I mean, or where they are when they graduate, I guess. We don't really.
There's no state assessment on that. You're right.
Okay.
I actually have a question about the 11th grade science test. So
Yeah.
you can take a lot of different science classes in high school, right? Like there's more choice than there is in elementary and middle school. So how does the test handle that?
It's whatever the standards are for the high school. I'd have to look exactly what it's, do you know off the top of your head?
I don't know always off the top of my head, but I do know that our high school science standards, they come in strands. And so when they take those tests, it isn't what they're taking that year in that course. It's cumulative over the strands. So a strand might be physical science, biological science, earth space, those types of strands where they are testing cumulative knowledge. And so even if you're taking chemistry as an 11th grader or physics as an 11th grader, your test is still going to assess your cumulative knowledge of science standards that you have been instructed on rolling up into that area. So it is not a course-based science test for 11th graders. It's a science standards-based test. But I'm going to dig in and look in more specifically too.
Yeah, I was going to ask because, like, I know you could have, like, as a junior, right? You might not have taken any physics yet in high school.
Right.
Like, you might have done biology, 9th grade, chemistry, and then chemistry again. Can you guys see that, like, in the, like, look at their score and then see, oh, they haven't had physics since 8th grade?
You can, and I think the test is a lot of biology is what I recall, but we'll look up the standards that are covered. It's all public record.
Most of them take biology in 9th grade, but, like, just based on when the classes fall out. Like, if you could take AP Chem junior year, for example, and then not take physics.
And you're
until
right, the
senior
kids
year.
might not have taken
And
the
some of
assessment.
them
They
won't
might be
take
taking the
physics at
assessment
all.
before they've taken the content.
I was just going to really say kind of that exact same thing is that the tests that they provide for 11th graders will be assumptive of what is a typical course progression in science. And so a typical course progression will be some sort of biology in freshman or sophomore year, of physical science, often sometimes physics. And so because there are some higher level science courses, physics can often also be thought of as an 11th or 12th grade. They would not be exposed for every single 11th grader to be expected to master what is a physics course, but they would likely be assessed in physical science standards that they've acquired through 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade comprehensive science. Yeah, much of it is cumulative over the standards that have grown over their K-12 time. So it won't be like they're testing on something they should have learned in 3rd grade and remembered, but it's the foundational skills and that background knowledge. They would not, I don't think, in the AZ Sci get a specific physics-based only question because that wouldn't be an expected or required course progression.
I was just going to add on to that from I'm a teacher. So I taught 5th grade for 2 years, but I'm a middle school teacher. And when they took the 5th grade science test, I understand 11th grade is different, but it was very much a reading test. And it's vocab heavy, but they would read through passages and experiments and have to analyze. So I told my students, this is about you being a scientist. It's like, can you take the information and like, what's the word I'm looking for?
Apply it.
Yeah, it's really not, it wasn't very content specific to even things we did that year. It was just all year long you have these essential questions and these phenomenon that you're exploring. And so it really was very a reading heavy type of test. And so I don't know if that helps or if the 11th grade test is similar, I don't know.
It is.
Yeah. Thank you. That was great. And I didn't link it in this presentation, but I can also make sure I share it with you guys. There's a website with like practice tests and all the standards that are being covered where kids can go in and practice if they want to. I don't know, I know that's so fun, but it's published by the state and they're always showing the items that have been used in the past that they're no longer using, but it gives the kids an idea of what they're going to be exposed to. And it's a pretty good resource. It's got different, for every test up here, every grade level, every area, they've got some kind of practice available to students. there were some questions about like how we compare to other districts, how we compare to the state averages, and what these numbers mean. So what's on the screen now are our percent proficients. Proficiency is the percentage of students that are are demonstrating mastery of the grade level standards at the end of the school year, which is approximately April in our state because that's when we test. So around the state, the first column shows the state averages for our English language arts grades 3 through 8, and then grade 11 is based on the ACT for our state. The second column is us and our proficiency levels of percentages out of 100. And then finally, there's a ranking of us compared to our districts around the valley. These districts are chosen because they're similar in demographics and or similar in size. So for instance, we don't compare ourselves to some districts because they're just not good comparisons for us. When you look at this, you'll see that we are number 1 among the elementary grade levels. We're number 2 in 8th and 11th grade English, and then 3rd in English language arts in 7th grade. We're not 100%. I mean, these are percentages, they could be better, but we are outperforming the state averages, and we're very competitive with our peers. We all look to each other, and when these scores come out, we all start talking about, what are you doing? What did you guys do? Like, we're curious. Especially us with Chandler, we go back and forth with Chandler a lot and ask, what are you guys doing? How did you get those, what's going on in your schools? Can we come watch? Can we see what kind of curriculum are you using? So those conversations do come up, but we all have room for improvement. So these are the English language arts comparisons. Yeah.
What trends do you see causing that?
4th grade from 73 to 62. It's a good question. Some years the tests, it just depends on the test too. We look at are we going down at the same level the state's going down as the same with our peers? So I think sometimes the tests are a little bit harder in certain grade levels. It just depends on the year. You'll see some fluctuations in these numbers, not time over time.
I mean, it is, compared to our peers, yes, that's happening to everyone, but why? I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
What's the margin of error on the test scores?
I would have to look into that. I'm not sure.
Right, because like when you take a test, you get a 95, but really it's like when you get an SAT grade, and I'm going to botch the number, like you get 1,000, but it'll say on there your range is actually 980 to 1020, right? So that's your range. It's not like, anyway, so it could be that wiggle is within the margin of error.
Like,
I know, but I don't know what the margin of error is.
yeah.
Are these numbers the actual, 2024 numbers?
So this is our
So this is not like an average over the last 5 years. So potentially, I don't know what year it is, but I'm sure there's whatever COVID disruption year. Somebody
Right.
knows that, I'm sure. What is it, 4th grade, 3rd grade? I don't know, 5th grade? Yeah. So like some of those things aren't shown here. Because do you ever see averages or chart these over time? I'm sure it's somewhere.
Yes, and Cindy may show that or share that. We definitely chart them over time, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, during the pandemic. We've also done that for students who were with us before, during and after, students who joined us during and have stayed after, and students who have come after. So we're able to see that trend line over the past 5 years. And what's the great news, and I felt really good about it as a parent choosing Scottsdale for my own child, is when you choose SUSD, your children will be stronger and stay stronger than kids who come to us later or leave earlier. And so that's information we've been able to see. To your point, I do agree we need to understand the margin of error, but also they are constantly, they being the Arizona Department of Ed, are field testing new assessment items. They'll take out different assessment items. And so absolutely, we will see scores at times vacillate up or down 7 to 8 points. We get really, really interested, concerned, or excited if you see those trends the same across everybody and we are an outlier. If we are an outlier around that bounce in a way that looks really negative, it means there's something we got to problem solve. If we're an outlier in a really positive way, that's also something we got to figure out how we keep doing it. But often the changes of those field tested assessment items, different assessment items, that's where you can see some of the bounce from year to year. And also I would assume here it's different forms of tests, because there's always a layer and level of protection around copyright, same test items, some of those types of things. And so that will always adjust a little bit, but we do look for big swings. And I think the state also, for their own reliability, will analyze those big swings and probably do different items and item analysis.
If you go to the Arizona Department of Education, you can you can sort by districts and you can look by schools. And under ELA and math and science, they have a neat little button. They'll show you the scores by the grades, and you can look for all, or through every grade through there. But you can hit a data button on there, and it'll show you the data. And then you can hit a trend button, and it'll graft it out for you. So if you go to the Arizona Department of Education, you can find the historical stuff. You can go back to like 2017 or something. I'm not sure how far back it goes, and you can see what's going on. And quite frankly, the trend is not that great. How does the state rank nationwide? Where are we?
I'm not sure well, it's hard to say considering that we all give different assessments. How would...
Correct. Well, if you know, then tell us. Don't ask us. Well, why are you trying to trick me, sir? Come on now.
I think we're 48th or 49th, to my understanding, in funding. I don't think we're that low in achievement. I think we're more in the 30s.
That's what I think too. We are not in the bottom quartile that I am aware of. I
Yeah.
think we're probably right in that, not where we want to be.
We want to be higher.
I think what you will find over time is they will always match funding to performance, and often there's a very tight relationship, and then of course there's rule breakers. What I think you'll find is also variance based on level of local and state control. So having served as a leader and teacher in Kentucky, Arizona, Colorado, and now where else? Oh, Florida. I'm like, where was I just? Florida. Very, very different governance, very different assessments, very different ways in which schools and systems use that. For example, in the state of Kentucky, it's a Commonwealth school-based decision-making rule. So their local control is at the site level of a school, not a district level. So they really run independent as school-based decision-making councils at the school level. So that was very different for me when I went to Colorado. It was much more at the district control level, and we would make decisions. The state would kind of give you recommendations, and you could follow those. You could civilly say, we'll see how that plays out. It was very different in terms of consequences. It's more similar, I would say, Colorado and Arizona, I have found so far. I'm new here to Arizona as an adult, but I did go to Arizona State and spent my first couple years teaching in the Balch School District. And so I would say Colorado and Arizona have been most similar in terms of that governance. Florida, where I just was, is very heavy-handed state-controlled governance. And so a lot of oversight and investment in how schools are run there, which is different. I would say, I don't know if it's good, bad, or the other, but I do think you will see different performance outcomes across those states, none of which are at the very tip top.
I recognize that there's different tests in all the different states, of course, but the ACT is nationwide, right, and it's standard. So that's probably the best gauge of how we compare nationally, right?
And we're doing well in that comparison. I didn't bring all my slides tonight, but yes, we are doing, our ACT scores in Scottsdale are better than the national averages in most of those content areas. And that's great to see, to see that we're, definitely competitive on ACT. ACT scores 11th grade, it's pretty much us and Chandler kind of hanging side by side, and Chandler tends to be a little bit better in 11th grade. So that's what we're seeing, at least in our district comparisons.
Yep. And I think one thing you'll see probably just recently released around nation's report cards and the NAEP assessments that are also provided, those are used at a federal level to understand ELA and math. However, what makes it really difficult for us to use those in any sort of meaningful way around our school system is the randomization of how those assessments are provided doesn't allow us to know what school, which kids, what are the inputs there. And so it really is a nation kind of quick metric dipstick, but it doesn't provide a full, well-rounded story. And so while we understand NAEP, we want to be national leaders. We want to do all of these things. It doesn't carry the same value in practice for our children, for our teachers, for our leaders, as it might for our nation to understand where we think we are.
And I didn't include this, I apologize, but this is last spring scores. So these are just 1 year of scores. And looking at the same kind of comparison for math, you'll see again that we tend to be highest in certain grade levels. Again, elementary grade levels, we are very strong. We are second in our comparisons in math in grade 6 and grade 11. We're 5th in 8th grade math. And all of our comparison districts were also struggling to get to that 50% passing mark. So that's a really red flag. We got to figure out what's going on and what's happening in 8th grade and how we can support those students and why we have that math achievement at that level.
So I teach 8th grade math.
Perfect.
I don't know what the answer is, I'll tell you. It's a tough one. But I was just, so this is my 17th year teaching, and I know that standards, it's a national thing. Their state has so much flexibility. But when the state's looking at this data around the district, I mean, when will the state say maybe we need to reassess our standards and rethink? Because some of the concepts are just, maybe not appropriate age-wise. I wonder how. And what are we still on the 2010 standard? Or yeah.
I also believe 2016 are the standards. But to your point, it's very true. I mean, the standards and how they're laid out are very different from state to state. What makes middle school mathematics unique here in Arizona, different from the other 3 states, it is all new learning, right, in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, whereas in Florida, when you move into 6th grade, you are going to continue some learning that you had in 5th grade. You might have started understanding, let's say, multiplying and dividing fractions to 3-digit numbers. You might have started 2 digits in 5th grade, and you're going to hop over to 6th grade and maybe do 3 digits and go beyond. In Arizona, the middle school mathematics standards are all new. And so it isn't cumulative all the way through. Now, of course, it's built on foundational mathematics instruction, but that's something we're finding. And so some of the on-ramping to intervention and supports is a much shorter when you have 3 years in 8th grade in that way. Currently, our state is, and so if you are interested, I very much encourage you, they're asking for feedback from educators and families around a process that they're calling essential standards. And so different also in Arizona is that we are not provided blueprints for our state assessments. There's not as much information provided to educators on the pathway towards achieving high levels of proficiency on your state assessments. Whereas in Texas, you can basically get the clearest blueprint where you should be prioritizing your instruction the most. You can get that also in Florida. You cannot get it here. And so it's not the blind leading the blind. We have great standards and assessments, but when we don't have a really clear understanding on which standard at the assessment level is the most important, where should I spend most of my energy? So our state right now is working through a process of taking all of our state standards and identifying which of those are essential. All learning is so important, but each of us can know that there are enduring pieces of information that we need from 5th grade to 6th grade to 7th grade to 8th grade. Ratios and proportions might be an example. You have to have that as an enduring understanding in order to be successful in Algebra 2. You need it in 7th grade, and it starts usually in 3rd or 4th grade. So those types of standards that you're gonna see in some way over and over, our state is trying to prioritize and give extra energy around essentials, using that term essential, so that we as school districts could also then help provide tiers of support, help our teachers get even more focused around, again, all of them are important, but some are essential. An example also would be kindergarten, counting and cardinality. If you know what that is, you probably taught kindergarten one day. I taught 5th grade, so I only learned when I was a principal. It's like one-to-one correspondence. One number is one digit, is one thing. Also first, second, third, right? I'm in first in line, second in line. You only teach that counting and cardinality, one-to-one correspondence, first, second, third, in kindergarten. It's the only place. It's not in 1st grade, it's not in 2nd grade. Now, if you don't know it in 1st and 2nd grade, we're gonna teach it to you. But that would be an example of an essential standard in kindergarten, that if we don't really make sure our kids know that, they're not going to be exposed to it over and over again. And if our 1st grade teachers are having to teach it, it also means they're having to deprioritize other standards. And so that's something we're seeing the state do, is like streamline, get focused, and help provide educators more information on the actual standards that are necessary for the most future success.
I will say also, and some of the other stuff that I presented, but I'm not going into tonight, we found in our district that our students that are with us longer, our kids that have been with us longer, are doing better on the assessments. We also found when we did an analysis, because we were able to go back in time and look at enrollment during COVID, we had a lot of students that stayed home during that year. Those kids are doing better than the kids that are brand new to us, but they're still behind the kids that came in person that year. So we do know that we have some catching up to do to help those kids get back to where they were, because we had those times when people were choosing to keep their kids home and not come to school. So we all are looking at all of that as well. And then we're just heavily focused on math right now because we know how critically important that is. Briefly, the accountability piece of all of this is once all these scores are compiled, every year our schools get school letter grades on an A to F scale. And the majority of the schools in Scottsdale are earning A's. Actually, all of our brick and mortars are A's and B's this year, which is great. Even our Title I schools, which is a big celebration for the last couple of years. So this last school year, again, all A's and B's. We're hoping to keep that up. And then this year, our district was also an A-rated district by the state, which is a great achievement as well. So how can you guys help your students prepare for the state assessments? I'll let you key this up.
Absolutely. So what you'll probably hear from teachers, from students, hopefully you're hearing in family newsletters, information on preparing for AASA. Practice is important. Don't believe what Allen Iverson says. He never won a national championship. Even though I love AI, just so you know, I'm a basketball girl and I love Allen Iverson. If you're listening up in the cloud, Allen, I love you. But practice is important. Too much practice drives up anxiety. It can also become a dominant thought in the minds of children who should not be learning for a test. They should be learning for their lives. We want to make sure we're doing right by them by providing these assessments. And so we know that we will be encouraging practice. Some practice at school. We know many of you families take time at home to engage your students in their learning and understand more. And so using IXL, which is our adaptive digital platform supporting our students in English language arts and math in grades 1 through 12, but specifically to Arizona State assessed grades, IXL has developed some skill plans that are aligned to the standards at that grade level that are assessed. So all throughout the year, kids are working in IXL at their level. If they're behind, they're getting a little intervention. If they're way ahead, they're getting pushed ahead. These skill plans that we're getting ready to show you a video, it's almost like a stop on my own individual journey for a little bit and let me practice my grade level expectations that I'm going to be expected to demonstrate at during the assessment window. And so these AASA skill plans truly are practicing the types of assessments, the type of content, and the type of standards that children will be presented with on those exams. Again, both are important. The individual practice that adapts at their own level, that's helping them to grow, catch up, keep up, move up. But also we do want to share with you and encourage practice on AASA skill plans because that is the grade level expectation. And what the worst thing in the world is for a student if they're struggling and we're presenting them on level work, but not grade level work. The first time they might ever see grade level work should not be the day they're sitting down for a test in April. They should be constantly engaged in grade level work, which they are, with systems of support helping them to catch up. And so we're going to show that to you, but happy to answer questions.
Some clarification for IXL. So is IXL a tool that is made specifically to help the children score better on the tests? I mean, I understand that it lifts you up and, you know, guides you in the direction so everybody's on the same page, but I see on the side there, you know, your personal ACT study plan. Is there a skill plan that they click on that is just for testing, or is IXL in general used to really make the test scores better?
I really appreciate that question. I think I totally understand, but I want to make sure if I don't that you clarify. It's actually both. So one, the day-to-day usage of IXL is to strengthen their understanding in those mathematics standards for life, for promotion to second grade, to get ready for algebra, to get ready for geometry. And so it really is additional practice on those types of mathematics problems that they're learning in class all day. So additional practice. What we're going to show you is a portion of IXL that they've built for us that are skill plans specifically designed to help them practice for the test. So does that make sense where it really is both? we want the majority of our school year time when they are on it to be on the first, where they're strengthening the skills they need to work on, moving ahead, moving up. But what we're showing you tonight is a recommendation just over the next 6 weeks before AASA to try to prioritize and offer you just resources at home to practice.
So if statewide testing went away, IXL would still be used. So if statewide testing just disappeared or went away, IXL would still be something that's used, a tool that's used?
Yes, we would still use it. We would absolutely still use it. We may not prioritize or spend as much time on AASA skill plans for that reason, but we would likely be making sure that we are finding the time to make sure students are constantly presented with and practice grade level expectations. I think that's really the most important thing. There's some way in which we say test ready, test prep. It's really grade level expectations. That's what those end of year exams are testing, the standards for that grade level. But yeah, if those tests went away, we would still use IXL to continue to strengthen based on where the kids are. And that's what's been so helpful. We have teachers who we know have kids that might be 2 or 3 years behind. This is helping them catch up. And then I was in a middle school a few weeks ago, and we have a kiddo who I think is in 8th grade, and he's doing calculus work in IXL because it's allowing him and presenting him with those types of opportunities and learning lessons, which his teacher can also do, but it was an 8th grade math class. And so doing pre-calc or calc and 8th grade standards and probably intervening on some kids that need still 5th and 6th just really asks a ton of our teachers. And so having this adaptive tool at the student level is why we have made that investment, and we'll continue to see how it goes. The research around usage tells us as kids are using at a certain frequency, the propensity for them to reach grade level and be proficient is much stronger. I've handed it to you.
No, you're fine. We also have all of our curriculum is loaded in here as well, I think. And so it's not just our assessment plans, but there's links to our curriculum across the grade levels that teachers can access as well.
So we're going to show, it's about 3.5, 4-minute video. Kim will have this and be able to share the links. Leaders will have it. Hopefully teachers will share it in parent newsletters. What you are seeing would be your student's view of their dashboard. And so Katie is our IXL gal. You'll hear her voice. She makes these great little screencasts. It's super helpful for me as a parent, even though I work in this system. What my kid's dashboard looks like is not what I'm working on all day, every day. Because I'm not a kid. I'm working on the teacher and admin side of it. So I hope that this is very helpful, and after we're done, definitely feel free to ask any additional questions.
Hello, Scottsdale families. We wanted to take a
Hello,
moment to show you
Scottsdale
how you can
families.
use IXL at home
We
to
wanted to take a
effectively
moment to show you
practice
how you can use
upcoming
IXL at
state
home to
exams
effectively
and
practice for the
benchmarks.
upcoming state exams and benchmarks. So I'm here
account.
logged
This is what it
into
looks like
a
from your
student
student's
demo
perspective when they
account.
log
This is
in.
what it looks like from your
I'm using
student's
the web
perspective when
browser,
they
which
log
is something
in.
that you can do at
I'm
home.
using the web
Students are
browser,
able
which
to
is
log
something that
into
you can do
Clever.
at
You
home.
can use
Students are
your
able to
cell
log
phone,
into Clever,
Kindle,
your
your
Kindle, your
tablet,
tablet, your
Amazon Fire,
whatever it is.
and
And you don't have to have a Chromebook or a laptop to be able to work on IXL.
So when
So when students log in, they land here on their dashboard. There are going to be some skills available for students to work on that have been assigned by their teachers. But because we're thinking about getting into that state exam prep, we really want to focus in on something called our skill plans.
So
when you're working with your students, you're going to want to go under the learning tab here, and you're going to want to go into skill plans. Your teachers have done a nice job of pinning the skill plans that your student would need to work on.
So
you can see here that Katie's teacher has pinned for her the 4th grade AASA mathematics skill plan. When she comes in here, she's going to see all of the math strands that are assessed on the Arizona State exam for 4th grade. We have taken all of our skills and we've perfectly aligned those skills to match AASA released exams and any blueprint information that we've analyzed. A blueprint gives us a rundown of the priority standards and how frequently they're assessed. So you can trust that this skill plan is going to give your child ample practice and get them ready for that state exam. So as we navigate the skills, your student can simply pop in and start practicing right from this page. When they click into a skill, there's a couple things that you need to look for. So the first thing is that, what is their current SMART score? If the student has worked on this skill to a SMART score of 80, then they do not need to practice that skill any further, and it would be best if they went to a skill that they haven't practiced yet. We do recommend that you can start at the top and move your way down. As you can see, you're doing some comparisons, estimation, and then you get into multi-step word problems. So it somewhat increases in complexity with the skills. We also recommend that students work on their lowest performing strand, and I'll show you how to access that in just a moment. So as I mentioned before, they can pop into any skill and they can start working. Now, we don't want students to practice 5 or 6 skills at a time every night. We really want to hone in on 1 to 2 skills. 1 is sufficient to a SMART score of 80. This can take anywhere from 10 minutes to 20 minutes. It really just depends on what the student's ability level is and how much practice they need. Again, we are just looking to get to a SMART score of 80. That is indicative of proficiency. So in order to determine what strand your student should work on that they might be struggling with the most, we want to take a look at your students' assessment scores. So we're going to go into the assessment tab here in your students, and my demo account here doesn't have the full score, but when you step in here, you're going to be able to see their overall math level right here. And then you're going to see 6 different strands of math, for example, and you'll be able to find the lowest strand. So if the lowest strand is algebra and algebraic thinking, when students are working in that test prep skill plan, we may want to have your child at home take a look at that algebraic thinking strand and really practice those skills. This is going to be a great way for them to align their current grade level and for you to get in some much needed practice before AASA in the coming months.
All right. Well, that is our short little video. Again, it's really just a tool. Most of your students, so again, these are for students in grades 3 through 8. Our high school students also can practice algebra and lots of those types of things, but these AASA skill plans are really specific to those students. We have ACT skill plans too for those kids. But your students, when they're at your home, they should actually be able to show you without the video how to do that, because they are doing it hopefully for like 10 minutes a few times a week. Not all day, every day, please. They should not be doing that. If they are, give me a ring. But I don't think that's a thing. But really and truly, your students should be able to lead you through that, talk to you about how that's going. In the event, though, they are not, we always want to give mom, dad, whoever takes care of kiddos at home, something in their back pocket. Or if your child is anything like mine and sometimes tries different stories on why his stuff doesn't work like everybody else's stuff, it gives you in your back pocket a Mythbuster. I need to be loaded with Mythbusters for my own kid. I did want to circle back around a little bit to science, if it's okay. I feel like I neglected science instruction because there are science and engineering practices. And so to your point of science instruction and the types of test questions, it is a reading test and it's assessing science and engineering practices. So those are really your ability to apply, analyze data, determine decisions, make reasonable observations, use evidence to draw meaningful conclusions. Those are the science and engineering practices that are really assessed towards that standards-based content. And so that is where you're seeing less on a multiple choice question for a chemistry formula and much more on a scenario that you would then use scientific process, scientific practices in order to solve. Before we wrap for the evening in terms of assessments, do you have any additional questions or feedback or anything you would want to offer or share with us?
So 2 things. First, in about 5 seconds, well, slightly longer, okay. I found 2 sources that said we are below national average on ACT. Okay, what's a good ACT score?
It depends on what your goal is with ACT.
No, what's the good composite score for ACT?
I think it depends on what your goal is for your ACT. So for example, right now I would want my child to get a 30 because it would mean he would earn full legacy scholarship at the University of Kentucky.
Okay.
He's not going to get that. He's got a 23, which tells me he's on track, on level, and did a
Okay,
fine job.
Two sources I found said 2024 SUSD is about 18. Okay.
I also believe composite was higher than 18.
Okay, so I would ask you to, here's my email and stuff. Could you send me your source? Because like I said, I found two sources. One said 17.7, the other said 18.2, something like that.
Okay.
National average was roughly 19 and some change. So we were below the average. The second piece of it is the grade level A's or whatever from the state. You're referring to the Board of Education, right? Their grades, not that. There's an Arizona Education Association, I think it is, you're talking about State Board of Education. Okay, so does it make sense? Chaparral High School is a grade A, okay? I've had two sons. I've been engaged with SUSD since the 90s, okay? So I'm not a newbie to Scottsdale. I've had 3 kids gone through SUSD. 2 graduated out of Chaparral. The average not proficient, or let me flip it. The average proficiency across the 3 academic subjects, ELA, math, and science, is 53%. So just over half the students at Chaparral High School are proficient in the 3 academic. Science is 29. If it wasn't for the 70% in English, it would be even worse than that, right? Yet they get an A. And I don't know for sure, but for what Chaparral number is, I should have looked it up. But the district graduates and promotes roughly 98%. They graduate out of high school in 4 years, about 42 to 43, or 92 to 93% of the students. So to me, an A, grade A, with just barely over half on average being proficient, and oh yeah, by the way, 92+% are graduating, is not an A school. It just boggles the mind that the state does that. I mean, 30% of the score, okay, there's 30 points eligible on the state calculation for proficiency. They got 91% of that. They earned 27.44%, Chaparral did. And only 30% of that scoring for getting an A is tied to proficiency, which I don't understand. Why less than a third of your grade for a school has to do with academics? I'm just confused.
So for that, it's 30% is on that test. It's either 20 or 30% is based on other academic measures through a college and career readiness indicator. So that includes.
That's 20%.
Okay, so that includes AP test scores, includes dual enrollment credits, students that are earning those higher grades.
Right.
It includes CTE, it includes a number of other
Right.
academic measures. So it's not just the assessment, it's a combination of things. Go ahead.
Well, I just saying, I read the description for the CCRIs, and I wasn't that impressed. But you can get 30% for graduation rate, graduation improvement. You can get for EL growth and proficiency, you get another 10%. So you can earn as much, and you can get 6 bonus points too, for just random stuff. But anyways, it's just a comment, okay, that I don't think when I have just barely over half my students are proficient, that's an A, okay?
I appreciate that perspective. I think all of us, especially as citizens, should be sharing those perspectives with State Board of Education and those types of folks. I would also, I hear you, I appreciate that perspective. Who knows Steph Curry? Have you ever heard of Steph Curry?
I went to
Steph
his
Curry.
alma mater.
Yeah.
He went to
He
my
did
alma
not,
mater.
no. Steve Kerr also. Those are 2 people who would be renowned in their profession as world champions, some of the highest winning, and the best shooters in the history of the NBA. Their proficiency rate is 45%. No, I hear you. I'm just trying to afford.
So that dovetails into a question I have, which is, as a parent, how do I interpret that score that my kid gets on a statewide assessment? And but really what I care about is what impact is it going to have on their life? Like, what does it tell me about how successful they're being in school, or how successful they're going to be? Like, I have kids that are getting close to graduation, after graduation.
Yeah, such a great question. So that single one-time dip in the year score should give you a little insight onto how are they doing right around grade level standards. Will they get 100% right? That would tell you, oh, they've mastered every single thing. They got 100% on that test. Realistically, for you to know as a parent how your child is doing in school, you should be having those ongoing conversations. You should be seeing work come back to you with feedback from teachers. You should be hearing from them via phone call, emails, or parent-teacher conferences about the different progress. Here's an area where I really see Cindy excelling. She's such a strong reader. She's synthesizing everything so very well. But you know what? I'm really struggling to see her break up multisyllabic words, and I think when she moves on, that's going to really trip her up in some of that higher academic vocabulary. And so that might be something we want to work on. Those are the types of conversations that we as parents should be leaning into to understand the progress of our child. I would say if year over year your child is scoring in the lowest grade band range, you should be seeking additional help. That should never happen without a school reaching out and saying, something's going on. Let's problem solve this together. Let's talk about this together. But one dip, one time is not a make of a single child. Looking at their body of evidence over the course of the year is critically important and something you should be engaged with teachers on an ongoing basis. I know for my own child, even though he's a senior, I still care how he's doing in school. I really need him to graduate. And he is not always getting 4s, 5s, 6s, and 7s, but I do believe he's very well prepared to succeed in life. But I'm not dependent on one piece of evidence to judge him that way. It's really that back and forth dialogue between the school and leaning into some of the other reporting options our teachers have. So IXL has great dashboards that can show progress over time. And us as a school district also constantly elevating ways in which we're providing that information, times and metrics where you see that. So for me, a progress report is helpful. A progress report with some data and evidence that shows their growth over time and some of the learning experiences that they've had, something they could demonstrate. That's really what I would want to see. And so it's really through those conversations and multiple data points and asking your kid.
Okay, but Mike, I have more slides. So the question is, how important is third grade reading? And then we really do need to wrap it up because I know everyone needs to get home and we have some more slides that are also important.
Okay. Third grade reading is important. First grade reading is the most important. So nationally, our nation has identified and decided third grade is a metric in which almost every single state I've ever worked in really doubles down.
Who decides that? Is it teachers decided that? Like when you say nationally, it was decided, who decided?
Typically, it's like it's a large variety. It can be consortiums of the governors associations. It can be commissioners of education across. Typically, what you'll find is vendor packages, so like a Pearson or things like that. They will design tests. It's also around developmental age appropriateness. While first grade reading is the most important, brain research would tell you that over and over and over again. Third grade is the measure that provides the most accuracy because it is also reading comprehension, the ability to not only decode, read fluently, encode, and write fluently. It is the ability to take and process that information and respond to complex texts. So it's very important, but I would say if we were really, really wanting to focus on the science of reading and having literate children, first grade is really where we want to make sure all kids are reading on level by first grade. Brain research also tells us a lot between second and third grade around brain development and the synapses in your brain. You actually go through a physiological change. Lots of people will see if you teach second or third grade, it's like, oh my God, the light bulbs went off. Yep, because all of the information we acquired, the language, the information, the media, the images, our brain goes through a natural process of pruning that information, sorting it and clustering it into different phylums so that as adults, we're pulling it from our files in ways that are smartly organized. Brain development tells us that starts to happen typically around 7 and 8 years old, but also dependent on how much sleep are you getting, how much food are you eating, what are your other lifestyles that contribute to that brain development. So I think also that might be why third grade, there's a lot of brain research that will say when they mapped and researched and published brain research in the early well, probably 2000s-ish, where it started to be used much more in our field. That's likely, I would assume, I've never done this though, I would wonder if that's where you start to see some of that trajectory around the times in which tests are provided in kids' grades. Sorry, Kim, I know we're trying to get out of here, but thank you for letting me talk about this.
Okay, do any reps have any announcements? Okay, so we're going to move into executive board updates, and Lisa, you're up.
Okay, thank you. I'm Lisa. I'm part of the SVC Executive Board this year. For anybody that was at the January meeting, Alexis Sussdorf from State 48 Public Affairs was here, and she went over a bunch of education bills that had been introduced this session. And so I just took a few that I feel are either related to SUSD or they have to do with school funding. So the first one is pretty self-explanatory. It's House Bill 2164, and it bans all processed foods to be served in public schools. And within the bill, I forgot who introduced it, but within the bill, there are a list of about 11 additives, preservatives, and dyes that are not to be in any food served in our public schools. One thing, though, is it doesn't apply to food that is sent from home for lunch or snacks that are sent from home. This is only for food served in the public schools. And one of the big reasons for this bill is that, childhood obesity, morbidity, just overall childhood wellness is considered a statewide concern. So, and I think this has a very good chance of passing. Next is House Bill 2213, and this would appropriate $3.8 million towards the free and reduced lunch program. Students would still have to qualify through the eligibility requirements for family income, but this, you notice, it's only for the 25-26 school year, so you've got 1 year of the appropriation, but there is discussion, and they feel that they're going to try to continue to provide the funding in future school years. All right, so HCR 2003 has to do with our aggregate expenditure limit, so the AEL is an amendment to the state constitution that creates a spending limit on education. And this would provide an override for the 2025-26 school year. Usually, every year, the legislature waits until the last minute to approve the override. And that creates everybody's on pins and needles, because if they don't approve it, our school districts are going to have to large budget. They will have to cut a lot, and so that obviously is, they kind of hold it to the last minute as kind of like a bargaining tool, or just to make us kind of nervous. But at least with this one, we would get a year of an override. Then we've got SP 1007, and I think Dr. Menzel had mentioned it. So this bill would authorize permanent use of tax credit funds for capital items, shade structures, playground equipment, as he mentioned, a robotics lab. Because prior, not too long ago, tax credit was very limited in what it could be spent on. It was
There was a provision you could use it for capital purchases, like so Arcadia bought 3D printers and a bunch of furniture for their robotics lab, but then last June you're no longer allowed to use that. You can still use tax credit funds for a lot of things, but not something like a piece of furniture that's a capital purchase.
Yeah.
And that's what this is. They're gonna
Yeah, this
reinstate
is,
that ability.
Kavanaugh introduced this and very strongly believes that the authorization to use the tax credit for those things should be approved. And when he was, I think Dr. Menzel mentioned it too, but I watched the committee meeting on that, and everybody, all of the House was so supportive of that. So I think that will pass as well, which is so great for our students. Okay, I'm going to just briefly go over this because this is actually very complicated. It's Senate Continuing Resolution 1015, which deals with Prop 123. Prop 123 was approved, was a ballot measure approved by voters in 2016 for 10 years. And what Prop 123 is an agreement to use additional funds from our state land trust to fund education. Normally, the land trust provides 2.5% to education. This would, after Prop 123, it increased to 6.9%. And the whole reason for Prop 123 is a lawsuit. It's a settlement and a lawsuit against the state for they did not fund education at the appropriate level during the recession. So Prop 123 is part of getting that money that we were supposed to have for those years. And this now is going to be expiring, and it's kind of crazy. So if the Senate doesn't do anything, it will revert back to 2.5% from the 6.9%. There has been discussion about different percentages because we obviously won't get 6.9 anymore. So the state treasurer, she recommends between 4% and 4.5%. But the thing is, it is already in the state budget that they will make up the difference between 2.5% and 6.9%. So they will be covering those, but don't know how long that they are going to be doing that. All right, here is what I feel, and many people too, is probably the most important piece of legislation for education. So this was a ballot measure. There was, actually, wait, is that right?
Yeah, it's a resolution which
Yeah.
goes on the ballot.
Yeah, okay, and this is for bonds. And the bond is a funding mechanism to help schools pay for things like capital projects, really just like capital projects. And so usually a bond passes by like 50.1% or greater. This resolution, if approved by 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate, would require bonds to pass with a 60% voter approval.
So I also want to add, it's not on the slide, this resolution is only for school districts, so cities and other taxing authorities also use bonds to get
yes,
revenue.
I was going to mention that. Why? I
Sorry.
mean, literally, you read the bill and it only mentions school districts. So don't know what that's all about. And the idea of requiring 60% voter approval, that is going to diminish a lot of bonds being approved. 60% is a hard level to reach. SUSD went out for a bond in 2016. It was improved, and that bond was used to redevelop Cherokee, rebuild Hopi, renovate Kiva, renovate school track and fields. So here's the thing, it only passed, I shouldn't say only, but it passed by 58.51%. So if this...
So we'll share how you can weigh in on this if
Yeah,
you want to
so
give
if
this a
this
thumbs up or a thumbs down. We'll share how to log into RTS and who all your reps are for if you live within SUSD district boundaries.
So yes, if this bond and any future bonds are requested from SUSD and this passes, I mean, none of that would have happened. Or we would have had to find the funds elsewhere, which isn't a lot just lying around for it. So again, RTS, register to speak. When you initially sign up, it needs to be at the Capitol. And Alexis Sussdorf said she would do it for anybody so they don't have to come down to the Capitol. So if you need your initial account activated, what they can probably email president at SPC, and then we can let Alexis know, and we'll circle around with you.
We'll include instructions for that in the communications that we send out. But
Yeah.
also, I'll say it's actually kind of fun to go down to the Capitol and do it yourself. I mean, it
Yeah.
is a little bit of a field trip, but if you don't want to share, you have to give your driver's license to prove who you are when you register online. So if you're not comfortable sharing that with someone else who's not you, then take a field trip down to the Capitol. They have a good cafe with coffee as well.
Yeah, but again, this one is so important. 60% is a lot to reach for voter approval for bonds, which are so important to our school district. So, thank you.
Okay, so I have some upcoming events, and this isn't an event, but anyway, things that I want to make you aware of. So the district is looking for parents to serve on a math curriculum committee for K-12, right? So all grades. You need to register for, if you're interested in this, you need to scan this code. It's on SPC's social media, and we sent this out to all the school PTOs. So hopefully you saw it in some of your school level newsletters, parent newsletters. But anyway, if you're interested in doing this, you need to do it tonight because they're setting the committee later this week. But we mentioned it. Okay, so other upcoming events on March 4th here, we're gonna have a PTO, PTA, APT roundtable. The theme is gardens. We're gonna have Blue Zone Scottsdale. So if your school is currently not Blue Zone certified and you're interested in it, you can sit at a table with these women and pepper them with questions about how you can do it. And you do not have to have a garden to be Blue Zone certified. There are other pathways that you can go about that, which is why I wanted to bring them for this event, because if you don't have a garden, it can be kind of overwhelming to think about putting one in. Having said that, though, we're going to have also a teacher from Echo Canyon. She is using a food recycler in her classroom. So she's basically composting in her classroom, and she's incorporated it into her instruction. So we're going to have a demo and see what she's doing and kind of what that looks like. So kind of bringing the garden into instruction. And then we're also going to hear from a Navajo elementary teacher. So Navajo just built a greenhouse, and it's really cool, and she's the garden lead for Navajo. Okay, our March SPC meeting is going to be a panel discussion on drug use in schools. So we're going to hear from the Chaparral and Mojave principals and the head nurse for the district, and then Josh Friedman, Director of Safety and Security. And that is a Monday morning meeting, Wednesday, March 19th. Sorry, did I say Monday morning? It is a Wednesday morning meeting, March 19th. All right, another event in March, and I have flyers for this on the back table if you want to grab one to share with your school. If you currently have a teenage driver or you will have a teenage driver in the future, this event is for you, and I mean it if you currently have one. They talk about safety, but they also explain kind of what happens when it goes wrong. And so like if you're a teenager and you cause an injury to someone, I learned this last year. It shocked me. That's why I want my kids to come hear it. The state can wait 7 years to file felony charges. So you should really drive safely and not drive impaired. And I think hearing that shock message and then kind of seeing some of the scenarios that they talk the kids through might be a way to break through to some kids. They also describe accidents that they've worked. The people who are talking are former. They're former police, and they would investigate fatality crashes. And some of the ones they describe are on roads that we all drive around every day in SUSD. Okay, I wanted to give you the topics of our remaining meetings for the semester. So in April, we'll hear about AI in the classroom, and then in May, we'll hear about marketing and communications. I'm going to be forming an election committee for next year's executive board soon, so all of you reps stay tuned for an email, because I want one, like we want one from each learning committee. And then lastly, we'll talk about our budget update. So this is everything that hit the bank account as of the 18th. We're doing really good on individual donations and grants, and our expenses are as expected. They're not exciting. They're business licensing. We have liability insurance, which lets us reserve this room. We have reservation fees for this room. We have website, email, all that stuff. We are a 501c3, which means we rely on donations, which is why we've been sending out emails asking for them. And this is what we spend money on. If you would like more detail about any of our finances, I am happy to share, so send me an email. It is, oh, I didn't put it on this one. I should put it on that slide. Anyway, it's just president@Scottsdale Parent Council, and there are many ways to donate. Check, Venmo, Zelle, and we have PayPal as well.
And
You're on.
am I? Okay, I don't know. There was an email sent to school principals and APT presidents, and I believe also SPC reps, just giving an overview of SPC and, you know, asking for a donation. So if whatever school you're from, you may want to go back to your APT or PTO or your SPC rep and ask, hey, what do you think about that email and donating? So, yeah.
Thank you all so much.